May it please the court, I am Nico Shuffler and I represent the state of Washington, and I'm requesting 2 minutes of rebuttal time.
Granted.
I am here to ask the court to grant the motion in limine. This is a case in which a young teenager has allowed her emotions and her words to get the better of her, and the consequences of those words has thus intimidated a school official with a threat to harm him. The motion should be granted for these following 3 reasons. 1, the transcript and relevant testimony are relevant to prove an essential element of the crime. 2, the probative value outweighs the prejudicial effect. And 3, the legislative intent, as interpreted by the courts, seeks to protect school officials. Looking at the relevancy of the testimony and the high school transcript, and State v. Myers considered whether evidence tends to make a fact more probable than not, and this evidence makes it more probable than not that Mr. Russell had a reasonable fear. Because of the first issue at hand, he did not have a reasonable fear, and therefore him and Ms. Walker did shake hands, and after that incident, he did not report her to the principal's office. However, that is when he went to go and request her record. After requesting her record, he did have more of a reasonable fear that she would act on such threat, and therefore this incident...
So you can create a reasonable fear from an unfounded fear beforehand?
From the intent. We're looking at, instead of a propensity argument, we're looking at the intent and motive behind Ms. Walker's words, the threat of her words.
I think, but we're not really looking at the threat right now. We're talking about what was going on in the mind of the complainant.
As in the reasonable fear.
So right. But he didn't have a fear when he originally requested these records and looked at them. He looked at the records because he was ostensibly worried about her performance or her, what had happened to her with her father. And then, however many months later, all of a sudden he's concerned for his own safety.
Yes, well, that's correct. After learning of the fight that Ms. Walker was involved with another student, and the testimony related to that fight, Ms. Walker was described as fuming mad and pissed off, and therefore acted out on her being fuming mad and pissed off, and thus got into a fight with the other student, and therefore it's reasonable for Mr. Russell to believe that Ms. Walker would act out in such a way against that intent as well. The second, being the probative value, outweighs the prejudicial effect. To determine whether the probative value outweighs the prejudicial effect, the court should consider other means of proof and factors, such as in Berrigan. The court determined that prior bad acts, if they could be the offense could be charged as an additional offense, it should be admitted into evidence. Looking at the facts in this case, the fight that the defendant was involved in with the other student, that could have been an offense that was charged instead of just school suspension. It could have been an assault, and therefore it makes major concern for the school officials and for the other students. And the use of prior bad acts for non-propensity-based theories, there must be some other similarity between the facts themselves and not just the actor. And so the similarities between the facts and here, between the fight and the history of...
Well, let's just talk about that for a second. Berrigan is a case about a very violent felon who had a criminal record, right? He had been imprisoned for acts that were similar to the things that he was being charged with in that case. Okay. This is a teenager, and the array of things that you want to admit are not related in that same way. Her grades, being late to class, a little, petty little conflict with another student that was an uncharged, not even bad act. How is that even remotely similar to a criminal bad act?
Well, that relates back to the legislative intent. The legislative intent of the statute is to protect the school officials and other students, and so the evidence seeking to be admitted shows that Mr. Russell was in fear because he didn't want another Columbine incident. And the history of what our state has been going through is when students are able to act out and to show that they don't have respect for authority or the ability to follow instructions and to be respectful young adults can result in situations such as, like Mr. Russell was fearing, Columbine issue could be a situation that's similar and started again.
So are the evidence rules lifted when you're in a school situation? Are there special rules in schools with students and teachers that are different, that evidence has to be weighed differently?
I am actually not aware of that, but I do believe that the evidence should be weighed differently because there are other students and other individuals involved other than just the victim and the defendant in this case. The victim, Mr. Russell, was actually in fear for the other students as well, and that is why he locked his door when Ms. Walker had walked away, and Ms. Russell then again further showed that her lack of respect for authority to come back to further confront Mr. Russell with the paper crumpled in her hand and pounding on the door to get in. So that therefore shows her intent to further intimidate Mr. Russell and the other students in the classroom. Therefore, the high school transcript and the related materials are undeniably relevant and probative to the central issue of whether Ms. Russell was placed in reasonable fear due to the defendant's threats, and the court should grant the state's motion in limine. Thank you.